The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty street of Durango, Colorado, as Catherine Vance clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands. The year was 1875, and her father's gambling debts had finally come due in the worst possible way. She had 24 hours to vacate the only home she'd ever known, unless she could somehow conjure up $300, a fortune she couldn't hope to see in a lifetime of honest work. Catherine folded the notice and tucked it into the pocket of her worn dress. At 22, she'd spent the last 5 years caring for her father as consumption slowly claimed him, watching helplessly as he sought solace in whiskey and poker games. Now he was gone, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. The mercantile bell jangled as Catherine pushed through the door, hoping Mr. Winters might extend her credit for one more week. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance," the storekeeper said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I've carried your account too long already. Times are hard for everyone." Catherine nodded stiffly. "I understand. Thank you for your past kindness." Outside, she leaned against the weathered clapboard, fighting back tears. The Durango mining boom had passed its peak, leaving most folks struggling. No one would hire a woman for wages that could save her now. "Miss Vance." The voice belonged to Edwin Blackwell, the town's lone broker, though most called him a shark behind his back. "I heard about your predicament." Catherine straightened her spine. "What of it, Mr. Blackwell? I may have a solution." His thin lips curved into what might have been intended as a smile. "Your father's debt has been purchased by the Silver Dollar Saloon. Mr. Harker is willing to negotiate terms." Catherine's stomach twisted. Everyone knew what kind of terms Silas Harker offered young women in desperate straits. "I'll speak with him myself," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The Silver Dollar sat at the rough end of Durango's Main Street, its painted facade garish against the fading afternoon light. Catherine had never crossed its threshold, but desperation made her bold. Inside, piano music competed with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Several heads turned as she entered, conversation momentarily faltering. "Well now, what have we here?" A heavy-set man with a waxed mustache approached. "Miss Vance, I presume? I'm Silas Harker." "I understand you purchased my father's debt," Catherine said, keeping her voice low. "Indeed I did." Harker gestured toward a door at the back of the saloon. "Let's discuss this privately." His office smelled of cigars and cheap cologne. Catherine remained standing even after he motioned toward a chair. $300 is a substantial sum," Harker said, settling behind his desk. "But I'm a reasonable man. Work for me for 2 years and we'll call it square." "Work," the word caught in Catherine's throat. "Entertaining my customers." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're a pretty thing. You'd be popular." Catherine's cheeks burned. "I could work as a barmaid, or that wouldn't begin to cover the interest, let alone the principal," Harker interrupted. "My offer stands. 2 years, or I'll have the sheriff seize everything your father left behind and sell you out by sundown tomorrow." "This is indentured servitude. It's illegal, it's a business arrangement," Harker corrected. "Perfectly legal when documented properly. And frankly, your only option." He pushed a contract across the desk. "Sign by morning or face the consequences." Catherine fled the Silver Dollar, blind with tears and terror. Night had fallen completely, and she hurried through the darkness toward the small cabin she'd called home. For the first time, she understood why some desperate souls turned to the rushing waters of the Animas River as their final escape. Back in her cabin, Catherine lit a lamp and sank to her knees before her mother's old trunk. Inside lay her few treasures: her mother's wedding ring, a silver hairbrush, a faded daguerreotype of happier times. Nothing worth enough to save her. Dawn broke with Catherine still awake, her decision made. She would run. Take the morning stage as far as her few coins would carry her and start fresh, somewhere no one knew of her father's sins. She had just finished packing her meager belongings when a knock at the door startled her. "Miss Vance, it's Deputy Marshal. Mr. Harker sent me to escort you." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. "I need more time." "I'm sorry, madam. My orders are to bring you to town now." With trembling hands, Catherine gathered her shawl. The walk of shame through town was worse than she'd imagined. Women pulled their children closer as she passed. Men stared or looked away entirely. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, her cheeks burned with humiliation. Inside, Harker waited alongside Sheriff Tillman and a clerk from the territorial court. A contract lay on the desk. "Just sign here, Miss Vance," Harker said, offering a pen. "Your father's debts will be erased and you'll have steady employment." Catherine stared at the document, vision blurring. This was at the end of her freedom, her dignity, her hopes for a decent life. The pen felt impossibly heavy in her hand. The door swung open with such force that it banged against the wall. A tall figure filled the doorframe, trail dust coating his denim trousers and leather vest. "Am I interrupting?" The voice was deep, with a slight drawl. Sheriff Tillman frowned. "This is private business, Malone." "Is it now?" The stranger, Malone, stepped fully into the room. "Looks to me like you're about to witness an illegal contract." Catherine finally looked up, finding herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. He couldn't have been more than 30, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen his share of hardship. "Jackson Malone," he said with a slight nod in Catherine's direction, "and you must be Miss Vance." "This doesn't concern you," Harker snapped. "I believe it does." Jackson reached inside his vest and withdrew a folded document. "This is the deed to Catherine Vance's property and the record of her father's debt. Purchased legally from the Territorial Bank this morning." Catherine gasped. "What?" "I've satisfied the debt in full," Jackson continued, his eyes never leaving Harker's increasingly reddening face. "Miss Vance is no longer under any obligation to you or anyone else." "This is preposterous," Harker sputtered. "You can't just—" "I just did." Jackson's tone remained even, but there was steel beneath it. "Sheriff, I believe our business here is concluded." Sheriff Tillman examined the papers Jackson had presented, then nodded grudgingly. "Appears to be in order. Mr. Harker, the debt's been settled legal and proper." Harker stormed from the office, nearly knocking Catherine over in his haste. She steadied herself against the desk, mind reeling. "Why would you do this?" she asked once they were alone. "You don't even know me." "Let's discuss it somewhere more comfortable," Jackson suggested. "May I escort you to the hotel dining room?" Numb with confusion, Catherine allowed him to guide her across the street to the Grand Hotel. Only after they were seated with coffee before them did she find her voice again. $300 is a fortune. I can't possibly repay you." Jackson's expression remained unreadable. "I'm not asking for repayment." "Then what do you want?" Catherine's voice sharpened with suspicion. "One man's cage might simply have been exchanged for another. Nothing you're not willing to give." He met her gaze steadily. "I need a housekeeper at my ranch outside of town. It's honest work with fair pay. You'd have your own cabin, meals provided, and Sundays off." "A housekeeper," Catherine repeated skeptically. "Just that," Jackson confirmed. "I've been meaning to hire someone since my mother passed last winter. The place could use a woman's touch. And if I refuse, then I'll tear up the debt and leave you to your life. The choice is yours, Miss Vance." Catherine studied him, searching for signs of deception. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Jackson's expression softened slightly. Let's just say I've seen what happens to women with no options in towns like this. My mother raised me better than to stand by and watch." For the first time in days, Catherine felt a flicker of hope. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow, if that suits. I need to pick up supplies before heading back to the ranch. Would give you time to gather your belongings. I'll be ready at dawn." True to his word, Jackson arrived as the first light broke over the eastern ridge. Catherine had spent the night packing her few possessions and scrubbing the cabin clean for its next occupants. She had little to show for her 22 years, just one trunk and her mother's old sewing basket. "This is everything?" Jackson asked, loading her trunk into his wagon. "Everything worth taking," Catherine replied. The journey to the Malone ranch took most of the day, following the winding road that paralleled the Animas River before climbing into pine-covered hills. They spoke little, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Catherine watched the changing landscape, breathing easier with each mile that separated her from Durango. "There it is," Jackson said finally, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a broad, green valley. "Malone Ranch." Catherine couldn't hide her surprise. She'd expected a humble homestead, but this was substantial, a large main house of hewn logs with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. In the distance, cattle grazed on lush pasture. "How many acres?" she asked. 1,500, Jackson replied. "Started with 40 when my father came out from Missouri in '54, built it up little by little." "And you run it alone?" "Got 4 hands who help with the cattle. Cook for the bunkhouse, foreman named Martinez who's been with us since I was a boy." He guided the wagon toward the main house. "But the house has been my responsibility since Ma died." The interior of the house reflected both comfort and neglect. The furnishings were solid and well crafted, but dust covered everything, and the kitchen showed signs of a bachelor's indifferent housekeeping. "Your quarters are through here," Jackson said, leading her to a small but pleasant bedroom off the kitchen. "Used to be Ma's sewing room. Thought it would suit you better than the attic room where our last housekeeper stayed." Catherine set her sewing basket on a small table by the window. "It's lovely, thank you. I'll bring your trunk. Thought you might want to rest tonight, start fresh tomorrow." "I'd rather begin now," Catherine said, removing her bonnet. "At least with the kitchen. You must be hungry after the drive." Jackson looked surprised, then pleased. "If you're sure you're not too tired." "I'm sure." While Jackson tended to the horses, Catherine rolled up her sleeves and tackled the kitchen. By the time he returned, she had a pot of stew simmering and fresh biscuits in the oven. "Smells like my mother's cooking," he said, washing up at the pump by the sink. "I'll take that as high praise," Catherine replied, "though I'm not sure I can live up to it. Already an improvement over my own efforts." Jackson took a seat at the table. "I can manage coffee and bacon, but not much beyond that." They ate in comfortable silence, and Catherine found herself studying her new employer when he wasn't looking. In the warm light of the oil lamps, his features were less severe than they had appeared in town. There was kindness in his eyes, despite the weathered face and the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "How did you know?" Catherine asked suddenly. "About my situation in town." Jackson set down his spoon. News travels fast in small communities. "I was at the bank withdrawing funds when I overheard the teller telling another customer about poor Miss Vance and what Harker had planned." "But why get involved?" "I told you my mother raised me better." "That's not a complete answer, Mr. Malone." Jackson's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "No, I suppose it isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "My sister found herself in similar circumstances after her husband died. The man who held her debts wasn't as public with his intentions as Harker, but the outcome would have been the same. She took her own life rather than submit. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. It was 5 years ago now. I was working a cattle drive in Texas when it happened, didn't know until I returned." His jaw tightened. "I swore then I'd never stand by if I could prevent another woman from facing the same choice." "Your intervention may have saved my life," Catherine admitted softly. "I had considered the river." Jackson met her gaze, understanding passing between them. "Then I'm glad I arrived when I did." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Catherine wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday, she had faced ruin and degradation. Today, she had a roof over her head, honest work, and the faint stirring of hope. She fell asleep wondering about the man who had saved her, and what ghosts haunted his dreams in the quiet ranch house. The following weeks established a rhythm to Catherine's days. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, cleaned and organized the long-neglected house, washed and mended Jackson's clothes, and prepared meals not only for him but occasionally for ranch hands who came to the main house on business. Jackson himself was often gone from sunrise to sunset, returning tired but always respectful. He treated her with a courtesy that bordered on formality, careful never to intrude on her privacy or make her uncomfortable. Still, she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. One evening in late summer, as Catherine set a blackberry cobbler on the table, Jackson cleared his throat. "The men are having a gathering at the bunkhouse Saturday night. Music, dancing. Nothing Rowdy Martinez keeps things respectable. You'd be welcome to join." Catherine looked up in surprise. "I haven't been to a dance since before Father fell ill." "All the more reason to go," Jackson said. "You've worked hard these past weeks. Deserve some enjoyment." "I don't have anything suitable to wear. There's a trunk in the attic with some of my mother's things. Similar build to you from what I recall. You're welcome to look through it." He stood, somewhat awkwardly. "Just a thought, no obligation." After he left, Catherine climbed the steep stairs to the attic. The trunk he'd mentioned contained several dresses, all well-made but a decade out of fashion. One in particular caught her eye, soft blue calico with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. With a few alterations, it might serve. Saturday evening found Catherine putting the final stitches in the dress. She had taken it in at the waist and shortened the hem, added a fresh white collar from one of her own garments and pressed it carefully. When she put it on, the effect was better than she'd hoped. The blue brought out the color in her eyes, and with her hair arranged in a simple but elegant knot, she looked pretty. It had been so long since she'd cared about her appearance that the realization startled her. She almost changed back into her everyday clothes, suddenly self-conscious about drawing attention. But the music had already started drifting from the bunkhouse, and some long dormant part of her yearned for the simple pleasure of a dance. Catherine slipped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way toward the sound of fiddles and laughter. The bunkhouse had been transformed, furniture pushed to the walls, lanterns hanging from the rafters casting a golden glow. A dozen or so people were already there, the ranch hands, the cook, a few women from neighboring homesteads, and some faces Catherine didn't recognize. Jackson stood talking with his foreman, his back to the door. When he turned and saw her, his conversation faltered mid-sentence. His gaze traveled from her face to the blue dress and back again, an expression of appreciation warming his features. "Miss Vance," he said, crossing to her, "you look lovely." "Thank you." Catherine smoothed her skirt nervously. "I hope your mother wouldn't mind my borrowing her dress. She'd be pleased to see it worn again, especially so well." He offered his arm. "May I introduce you to everyone?" The evening passed in a blur of new faces, lively music, and the forgotten pleasure of conversation beyond the walls of the ranch house. The ranch hands, initially awkward in her presence, relaxed when they saw how easily she laughed at their jokes and stories. Martinez's wife, Alina, took a particular liking to Catherine, insisting on introducing her to everyone she knew. "You've brought life back to the main house," Alina said when they had a moment alone. "The patron has been different these past weeks. Less solitary." "He's been very kind," Catherine replied carefully. Alina's knowing smile suggested she heard all Catherine wasn't saying. The right woman could heal what was broken in him after his mother and sister passed, just as the right man might heal what was broken in another. Before Catherine could respond, the fiddler called for partners for a reel. To her surprise, Jackson appeared at her side. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. Catherine hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. "I may be out of practice. That makes two of us." They joined the other couples, forming two lines. The music began, and Catherine was swept into the pattern of the dance forward and back, turning under Jackson's arm, joining hands with other dancers before returning to him. She had forgotten the simple joy of movement to music, the pleasure of being partnered by a man who moved with quiet confidence. When the dance ended, they were both breathless and laughing. Jackson's usual reserve had softened, and in that moment, with his hair slightly tousled and genuine warmth in his smile, Catherine thought him handsome in a way that caught her heart unawares. "Another?" he asked as the fiddler readied for the next tune. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They danced 3 more sets before taking a break for refreshments. Jackson brought her a cup of punch, standing closer than was strictly necessary in the crowded room. "You seem happy tonight," he observed. "I am," Catherine admitted, "happier than I've been in a very long time. It suits you." His eyes held hers. Happiness. Something shifted between them in that moment, something subtle but profound. Catherine felt it like a physical change in the air, a new awareness of him not as her employer but as a man. A man whose steady gaze made her cheeks warm and her pulse quicken. Before either could speak again, a commotion at the door drew their attention. Edwin Blackwell stood in the entrance, swaying slightly, clearly having sampled liberally from a flask visible in his coat pocket. "Well, if it isn't the high and mighty Jackson Malone," Blackwell slurred. "And look who's with him, the debt-ridden daughter selling her services in a new way." The room fell silent. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face as all eyes turned toward her. Jackson stepped forward, his expression darkening. "You're drunk, Blackwell. Leave now before you say something you'll regret." "Regret? The only regret is that Harker didn't get what he paid for." Blackwell sneered. "Everyone knows you only bought her debt to get her in your bed. At least Harker was honest about his intentions." Before anyone could react, Jackson crossed the room in 3 long strides and hauled Blackwell outside by his collar. The sounds of a scuffle followed. Catherine stood frozen, mortification washing over her in waves. Alina appeared at her side. "Come, Querida, I'll walk you back to the house." "No," Catherine squared her shoulders. "I won't slink away in shame for something I haven't done." When Jackson returned moments later, his knuckles were bloodied but his composure restored. "Mr. Blackwell has been escorted off the property," he announced to the silent room, "and won't be returning." He crossed to Catherine, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm sorry you had to endure that. If you wish to leave—" "I don't," she interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily despite her burning cheeks. Jackson nodded once, then turned to the musicians. "I believe we were in the middle of a celebration." The fiddler struck up a lively tune and gradually the party resumed. But something had changed. Catherine noticed glances, whispers behind hands. Whatever Blackwell's intent, his words had planted seeds of doubt about her position at the ranch. "Don't mind them," Jackson said when the last dance ended. "Gossip dies when there's nothing to feed it." "Does it?" Catherine asked as they walked back to the main house under a canopy of stars. "Or does it simply grow more elaborate in the absence of truth?" Jackson stopped on the porch, turning to face her. "What truth would you have me share, Miss Vance? That you rescued me from a terrible fate out of kindness, not other motivations. That our arrangement is exactly what you claimed employment, nothing more. And if I admitted that seeing you in that blue dress tonight made me wish for something more than an employer-employee relationship." Jackson's voice was quiet but clear in the night air. "Would that prove Blackwell right?" Catherine's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my intentions when I paid your father's debt were exactly as I stated, but my feelings since you've been here." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly less assured. "They've become complicated." "Mr. Malone, Jackson," he corrected. "After all this time, I think you might call me by my given name." "Jackson," Catherine said, testing the feel of it on her tongue. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. I shouldn't have spoken at all." He stepped back. "Forgive me. The last thing I want is for you to feel uncomfortable in what should be your home." "I'm not uncomfortable," Catherine said softly. "Just surprised." Jackson studied her face in the moonlight. "Whatever happens or doesn't happen between us, your position here is secure. I want you to know that." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Good night, Jackson." "Good night, Catherine." She slipped inside, heart racing with emotions she couldn't name. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she turned the key in her bedroom door not out of fear of Jackson, but of her own confusing feelings. The following morning, Catherine rose early as usual to prepare breakfast. She had barely slept, turning over the events of the previous night in her mind. When Jackson entered the kitchen, the air between them was charged with unspoken words. "About last night," he began. "It's forgotten," Catherine said quickly, setting a plate before him. "Is it?" His gaze was penetrating. "Because I haven't forgotten a moment of it." Catherine busied herself at the stove, avoiding his eyes. "We should focus on practical matters. I've noticed the roof above the sitting room leaks when it rains, and the pantry needs restocking before winter." Jackson sighed but accepted her redirection. "I'll look at the roof today. As for supplies, I'm heading into Durango on Thursday. You're welcome to accompany me. Make sure we get everything needed." The thought of returning to Durango made Catherine's stomach tighten. "I don't think that would be wise. You can't avoid town forever," Jackson said gently. "And no one there has power over you anymore." Catherine knew he was right, but the prospect still filled her with dread. "Very well. Thursday." The intervening days passed with a new undercurrent of tension. They were overly polite with each other, careful not to touch even accidentally. The easy companionship of previous weeks replaced by awkward formality. Catherine found herself simultaneously dreading and longing for moments in Jackson's presence, confused by her own reactions, by the flutter in her stomach when he entered a room. Thursday dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. They set out early, the wagon loaded with ranch products to sell in town: butter, eggs, smoked meats, and hides. Catherine wore her best dress and bonnet, determined to face Durango with dignity. The journey passed mostly in silence until they crested the final hill overlooking the town. "We'll be back at the ranch before nightfall," Jackson said, correctly reading her anxiety. "Just a few hours of business, then home." Home. The word warmed something inside Catherine. Somehow, in the month since Jackson had rescued her from Harker's contract, the Malone ranch had indeed become home. Durango was bustling with its usual activity: miners coming off shift, freight wagons unloading at the mercantile, ladies gossiping outside the millinery. Catherine kept her head high as Jackson helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store. "I have business at the bank and the land office," he said. "Will you be all right selecting the supplies?" "Of course." Catherine was grateful for the task, preferring to stay busy rather than idle where curious eyes could study her. Inside the mercantile, Mr. Winters recognized her immediately. "Miss Vance, what a pleasure. We've wondered how you were faring." "Very well, thank you." Catherine handed him her carefully prepared list. "I'm purchasing supplies for Malone Ranch." Mr. Winters' eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, Mr. Malone is one of our most valued customers. I'll have this gathered for you directly." While the clerk assembled her order, Catherine examined bolts of fabric, considering new curtains for the sitting room. She was so absorbed in comparing patterns that she didn't notice the women entering until their voices carried clearly across the store. Living out there alone with him, not even a proper chaperone. After what her father was, can you expect better from the daughter? Probably thinks she's secured her future. Mr. Harker says he paid good money for her contract before Malone interfered. Says there's something improper about the whole arrangement. Catherine's cheeks flamed, but she forced herself to turn and face the gossips directly. "Good morning, Mrs. Calloway, Mrs. Benton. I trust you're both well." The women had the grace to look embarrassed at being overheard. Mrs. Calloway recovered first. "Miss Vance, we heard you'd left town." "To work as housekeeper at Malone Ranch," Catherine clarified, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Malone has been a perfect gentleman and employer." "Of course, dear Mrs. Benton said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though living under a bachelor's roof does invite certain assumptions. I've found that people determined to think the worst will do so regardless of facts," Catherine replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have errands to complete." She turned her back on them, but their whispers followed her to the counter where Mr. Winters waited with her supplies. His expression was sympathetic. "People talk, Miss Vance. It's what they do when their own lives lack interest. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Winters." Catherine paid for the goods. "Could you have these loaded in Mr. Malone's wagon when he returns? I have one more stop to make." Outside, Catherine took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. She had intended to visit the dressmaker for patterns, but the encounter in the mercantile had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Instead, she found herself walking toward the small church at the edge of town. The interior was cool and quiet, sunlight filtering through simple stained glass. Catherine slipped into a back pew, grateful for the solitude. She wasn't particularly religious, but something about the peaceful sanctuary calmed her frayed nerves. "Seeking answers, my child." The voice startled her. A gray-haired man in a clerical collar stood in the aisle. "I'm not sure what I'm seeking," Catherine admitted. The pastor sat beside her. "I'm Father Thomas, new to Durango as of last month, Catherine Vance." "Ah," recognition flickered in his eyes. "I've heard your name mentioned," Catherine sighed. "No doubt unfavorably." "Actually, Mr. Malone spoke of you quite highly when he made his donation to our building fund last week. Said you transformed his home with your presence." Surprised, Catherine studied the elderly priest. "He was here, in church," Father Thomas smiled. "First time in years, according to the deacon, made quite an impression with his generosity and his questions." "What questions?" "About redemption, second chances, whether a man with regrets could hope for happiness." The priest's eyes were kind. "And whether the church still performed marriages for those without family to witness." Catherine's heart skipped. "I see." "Do you?" Father Thomas patted her hand. "Sometimes the path forward requires us to stop looking backward, Miss Vance, for everyone involved." Before Catherine could respond, the church door opened and Jackson himself appeared, looking concerned. "Catherine, the mercantile said you'd headed this way." He nodded respectfully to the priest. "Father Thomas, Mr. Malone, I was just getting acquainted with Miss Vance." The priest stood. "I'll leave you two to talk." When they were alone, Jackson sat beside Catherine. "Are you all right? Did something happen in town? Nothing unexpected?" Catherine smoothed her skirt. "Just reminded that small towns have long memories and active imaginations." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Who upset you?" "It doesn't matter." Catherine met his gaze, "but it did make me realize something important." "What's that?" "That I can't continue as your housekeeper indefinitely." Pain flashed across Jackson's features. "You want to leave?" "I didn't say that." Catherine took a deep breath. "What I mean is, the current arrangement leaves both of us vulnerable to gossip and speculation. If I'm to stay at the ranch, there needs to be clarity about my position there." "Clarity," Jackson repeated slowly. "Father Thomas mentioned you'd spoken with him about marriages performed without family present." Jackson's eyes widened, then narrowed suspiciously. "That was meant to be a private conversation." "He didn't betray any confidence," Catherine assured him, "merely mentioned it in passing." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the church bell marking noon. "I've handled this all wrong," Jackson finally said, running a hand over his face. "Rushed things, made you uncomfortable." "You haven't," Catherine protested. "If anything, you've been too careful. Too respectful of boundaries that perhaps needn't be there." Jackson studied her face. "Catherine Vance, are you proposing to me in a church?" A startled laugh escaped her. "I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking, though traditionally the man does the asking." "Nothing about us has been traditional from the start." Jackson took her hands in his. "But I'd be a fool not to recognize a miracle when it's offered to me." "Is that what this is? A miracle?" "What else would you call it when a woman like you looks at a rough, solitary rancher and sees something worth choosing?" His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "I've loved you since the third week you were at the ranch. Since I came in from the rain and found you reading by the fire, so absorbed in your book you didn't hear me enter. You looked at peace, at home, and I knew then I wanted to see that expression on your face every day for the rest of my life." Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you came to the ranch out of necessity, not choice. Because I never wanted you to feel obligated by what I'd done." Jackson's voice roughened. "Because I was afraid you'd say no. And if I say yes, then I'd ask you to marry me. Today, tomorrow, whenever you're ready." His blue eyes held hers. "I'm not a perfect man, Catherine. I'm stubborn and set in my ways, but I swear I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Catherine's heart felt too full for her chest. "I think you already are." Jackson leaned forward, hesitating just before his lips met hers. "Is this a yes?" In answer, Catherine closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with months of unspoken longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Father Thomas said he's free this afternoon," Jackson murmured against her hair. Catherine laughed. "That's very soon." "I've waited my whole life for you, seems like long enough." His expression grew serious. "Unless you need more time." Catherine thought about the ranch, about the sense of belonging she'd found there, about the man beside her who had saved her in more ways than one. "No," she said with certainty. "I don't need more time." They were married that afternoon in the small church, with Mr. Winters and his wife as witnesses. Catherine wore her blue dress, and Jackson a clean black suit that made him look younger and somehow vulnerable. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, exchanged with steady voices and clasped hands. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Father Thomas said, beaming at the couple. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Malone. Jackson lifted Catherine's face to his with gentle hands. Mrs. Malone, he whispered before claiming her lips. The return journey to the ranch was different in every way from their departure that morning. They sat close on the wagon seat, stopping once to share the lunch Mrs. Winters had packed for them, talking and laughing with the ease of old friends and the excitement of new lovers. What will the hands think of this sudden development? Catherine asked as the ranch came into view. That I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory, Jackson replied, squeezing her hand. Martinez has been after me to propose to you for weeks. Has he now? Catherine arched an eyebrow. And Alina has been dropping hints about what a fine husband you would make. Seems we were the last to know what was obvious to everyone else. Jackson guided the wagon into the yard. To their surprise, the ranch hands were gathered near the main house, and a cheer went up when they saw the wagon approach. Martinez stepped forward, grinning broadly. Father Thomas sent word with the mail carrier, he explained. We've prepared a small celebration for the patron and his bride. Catherine blushed as Jackson helped her down from the wagon. This wasn't necessary. Of course it was, Senora, Alina interrupted, embracing her warmly. A marriage deserves celebration. Come, we've prepared a feast. The evening passed in a blur of good food, music, and congratulations. Catherine found herself watching Jackson as he moved among his men respected, even beloved by them. This was a side of him she'd glimpsed, but never fully seen, the natural leader, the man who had built something meaningful in this valley. As twilight deepened, the celebration moved to the bunkhouse, giving the newlyweds privacy. Jackson and Catherine stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, his arm around her waist. Having second thoughts, he asked, noticing her pensive expression. Not one. Catherine leaned into his embrace, just marveling at how life can change so completely in the space of a day. Or in the moment, a woman walks into a sheriff's office looking like she carries the weight of the world. Jackson turned her to face him. I knew then, you know. Not that I loved you, that came later, but that you were someone worth knowing, worth saving. I'm not sure I needed saving as much as the chance to save myself, Catherine replied, which you gave me. And now we save each other. She reached up to touch his face. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? A partnership. Jackson's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude. I like the sound of that, Mrs. Malone. He swept her into his arms then, carrying her over the threshold into their home, not as employer and employee, not as rescuer and rescued, but as husband and wife, beginning a journey neither had expected but both now embraced with full hearts. Winter settled on the valley with a gentleness that belied its usual harshness in the Colorado mountains. For Catherine, the shorter days and longer nights brought an unexpected joy as the ranch turned inward, focused on hearth and home rather than the constant work of the warmer seasons. She and Jackson established new rhythms together: morning coffee before dawn as he prepared for the day's work, shared meals where they discussed books and ideas, evenings by the fire where she mended while he carved small figures from pine, a hobby she hadn't known about before their marriage. And night, when they discovered each other as lovers with tender patience and growing passion. I never imagined marriage could be like this, Catherine admitted one evening in late December as they lay tangled in each other's arms, the bedchamber warm despite the snow falling outside. Like what? Jackson traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. So, equal. My parents' marriage was loving, but traditional. Father made decisions, mother followed. I always thought that was the natural order. Jackson chuckled. Have you met a Western rancher whose wife isn't his partner in every sense? Out here, women who can't hold their own don't survive long. Is that why you chose me? Because you thought I could survive. I chose you because I couldn't imagine living without you." His voice deepened. "Your strength was just a fortunate bonus." Catherine shifted to look into his eyes. "You make me feel both strong and protected at the same time. I didn't know that was possible." "That's how you make me feel too." Jackson kissed her softly. "Especially when you stood up to Martinez last week about those calves." "He was being stubborn," Catherine said, smiling at the memory. "Those calves needed to be brought into the barn during the cold snap, no matter what his 30 years of ranching experience told him. And they thrived, proving you right." Jackson pulled her closer. "I think he's finally accepted that the ranch has two bosses now." As winter deepened, Catherine found herself busy with preparations for Christmas, the first real celebration since Jackson's mother died. She decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baked cookies from Alina's recipes, and secretly worked on a special gift for her husband when he was out with the herd. Christmas Eve brought a break in the snow, and the ranch hands gathered in the main house for a feast unlike any the ranch had seen in years. Catherine had spent days cooking with Alina's help, creating traditional dishes from her childhood alongside Mexican specialties, the hands favored. Jackson watched her move among their guests with easy grace, laughing and comfortable in a way he'd never seen before. When their eyes met across the room, the love reflected there made his heart swell. Later, when everyone had departed and they were alone by the fire, Jackson presented Catherine with a small wooden box. "Merry Christmas," he said, suddenly nervous. Catherine opened it to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Inside was a miniature painting of the ranch house. "Jackson, it's beautiful," had it made in Denver. "Martinez's son delivered it yesterday." He helped clasp it around her neck. "Thought you should always have home with you wherever you go." "I love it." Catherine blinked back tears, then reached beneath the sofa. "Now yours, though it can't compare." The package was soft, wrapped in brown paper and string. Jackson opened it carefully to reveal a quilt lovingly pieced from scraps of fabric, some he recognized from his mother's old dresses, others new. "Catherine." He ran his hands over the intricate stitching. "When did you find time for this?" "I've been working on it since we married." She pointed to different sections. "This is from your mother's favorite dress, this from my blue dress, this from your old shirt that tore in the branding." Her finger traced a pattern at the center, a heart containing their initials and wedding date. "So we're always at the heart of our home." Jackson couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, hoping she could feel everything he couldn't say. "Merry Christmas, husband," Catherine whispered against his chest. "Merry Christmas, wife." The new year brought changes to the ranch. With Catherine's encouragement, Jackson expanded their operations, adding sheep to the cattle and planting more extensive crops in the fertile bottomland. They hired 2 more hands, built a proper cookhouse, and began improvements on the main house that Catherine had been quietly planning for months. In late January, a letter arrived from Durango that changed everything. Mr. Winters wrote that Silas Harker had died suddenly, leaving the Silver Dollar Saloon without an owner. The property was to be auctioned the following month. Why would Mr. Winters think we'd be interested in a saloon? Catherine asked, puzzled by the letter's suggestion that Jackson might want to bid. Jackson looked uncomfortable. "There's something I never told you about your father's debt." "What about it?" "The land deed Harker held as collateral. It wasn't just for your cabin in town." Jackson took her hands. "Your father owned a parcel of land adjacent to the Silver Dollar, prime commercial property that Harker coveted for expansion. That's what made your debt so valuable to him." Catherine stared at him. "Are you saying I still own land in Durango?" "We do, yes." I didn't mention it because it seemed unimportant at the time and later. Well, I didn't want to remind you of painful memories. But this changes everything, Catherine said, mind racing. If the silver dollar property is available and we already own the adjacent land, we could combine them, Jackson finished her thought. Create something new in that space. For the next several days, they discussed possibilities late into the night. The ranch was prospering, but diversification would provide security against the boom and bust cycles that plagued so many Western enterprises. What if it wasn't another saloon? Catherine suggested one evening. What if it was something Durango actually needs? Like what? A proper hotel with a respectable dining room, somewhere families could stay when passing through. The nearest decent accommodation is 30 miles away in Silverton. Jackson considered this. The railroad's expanding, more settlers arriving every month, could be a sound investment. We could call it the Malone House, Catherine said, warming to the idea. Alina's nephew is trained as a chef in Santa Fe. We could hire him to run the kitchen. And who would run this hotel? Jackson raised an eyebrow. We can't abandon the ranch. We'd need a manager, of course. Someone trustworthy. Catherine hesitated. I was thinking of my cousin Clara. She wrote last month that she's considering moving west since her husband died. She ran a boarding house in St. Louis for years. Jackson studied his wife's excited face. You've given this a lot of thought. It would be a new beginning for that place, Catherine said softly. A way to transform something dark into something good. 2 weeks later, they traveled to Durango for the auction. The town had changed little since their wedding day, though Catherine noted new construction at the north end where the railroad was extending its reach. The auction drew a substantial crowd, mostly locals curious about who would take over the infamous establishment. When Jackson placed his bid considerably higher than anyone expected, a murmur ran through the assembled townsfolk. Going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Sold to Mr. Jackson Malone. As they signed the papers in the land office afterward, Catherine felt a strange sense of completion. My father would be amazed to see this day. Do you think he'd approve? Jackson asked. Of transforming his greatest mistake into something worthwhile, Catherine smiled. I think he'd be grateful for the redemption, even if he didn't deserve it. Spring brought rapid changes. The silver dollar was demolished, and construction began on the Malone House Hotel. Catherine's cousin, Clara, arrived from St. Louis, full of ideas and energy, and took charge of planning the interior while Jackson oversaw the building itself. Back at the ranch, Catherine found herself unusually tired, napping in the afternoons and occasionally queasy in the mornings. She suspected the cause but waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Jackson. On a perfect May evening, with the valley lush and green and the new foals frolicking in the pasture, she took her husband's hand as they sat on the porch after dinner. I have something important to tell you, she began. Jackson looked concerned. Are you unwell? You've been pale lately. Not unwell exactly. Catherine placed his hand on her still flat stomach, just creating something new. It took Jackson a moment to understand, then his eyes widened. A baby, you're certain? Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We'll have a Christmas child, he thinks. Jackson let out a whoop that startled the horses in the nearby corral, then swept Catherine into a careful embrace. A child, he whispered against her hair. Our child. Are you pleased? She asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Pleased doesn't begin to describe it. He looked into her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. A year ago, I was a lonely man with nothing but work to fill my days. Now I have you, and soon, a family of our own. That night, as they lay together planning names and dreams for their child, Catherine marveled at life's unexpected turns. If my father hadn't left those debts, If Harker hadn't been so openly vile, if you hadn't happened to be in the bank that day. Jackson kissed her softly. Too many ifs to count. Let's focus instead on what is. What is? Catherine repeated, curling against his side. A man and a woman who found each other against all odds. A child on the way. A home filled with love. And a future bright with promise, Jackson added, his hand protective over their unborn child. The months passed in a blur of activity. The hotel in Durango neared completion, with Clara proving herself an exceptional manager even before opening day. At the ranch, Catherine prepared a nursery in the small room adjoining their bedroom, while Jackson crafted a cradle from cherry wood, more elaborate than anything he'd built before. By November, Catherine's condition was obvious, her belly round beneath her loose dresses. She moved more slowly but insisted on maintaining her duties, though Jackson and Alina conspired to lighten her workload whenever possible. "You're hovering again," she told her husband one afternoon as he appeared in the kitchen for the third time in an hour. "Just checking if you need anything," Jackson defended himself. "What I need is for you to trust that I know my limits." Catherine softened the words with a smile. "This baby is as sturdy as its father. Dr. Wilson says everything is progressing perfectly." December brought heavy snow and the grand opening of the Malone House Hotel. Despite her advanced pregnancy, Catherine insisted on attending the celebration. The building was magnificent, 3 stories of solid construction with large windows, a grand staircase, and a dining room that could seat 50 guests. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Catherine said as they toured the completed hotel. "Clara has done wonders with the furnishings." "And already booked through January," Jackson added. "The Railroad Commission has taken the entire second floor for their executives." As they moved through the crowded reception, Catherine noticed a change in how the townspeople regarded her. The whispers now were admiring rather than scandalous, the glances respectful instead of judgmental. She and Jackson were no longer objects of gossip but successful business owners bringing prosperity to Durango. "Mrs. Malone," Mrs. Calloway approached, all smiles now. "What a lovely establishment." "The town has needed something of this caliber for years." "Thank you," Catherine replied graciously, choosing to forget the woman's previous unkindness. "We're very proud of what we've created here. And soon to be parents as well. Such blessings." Later, as Jackson helped her into their wagon for the journey home, Catherine laughed softly. "What's amusing you?" he asked. "Just thinking about how completely life can change." She settled her cloak around her shoulders. "A year and a half ago, I was nearly sold into servitude in a place not 100 yards from where we're standing. Today, I'm the co-owner of the finest hotel in town, married to the man I love, with our child about to enter the world." "From tragedy to triumph," Jackson agreed, lifting the reins. "Though I'd say the triumph is entirely mine." The baby arrived 3 days before Christmas during the worst blizzard in living memory. Dr. Wilson had been trapped on the ranch after checking on Catherine the previous day, fortunate timing that Jackson later attributed to divine intervention. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the morning. Jackson paced the hallway, alternating between prayer and near panic, until finally, a thin wail pierced the heavy silence. Dr. Wilson emerged from the bedroom, tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Malone. You have a son, a strong one by the sound of him." Jackson's legs nearly gave out, and Catherine, exhausted but well, "You can go in now." Nothing had prepared Jackson for the sight of his wife pale, but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in the quilt she had made for him that first Christmas. "Meet your son," Catherine said softly as he approached the bed. "James Thomas Malone." Jackson took the tiny infant with trembling hands. The boy had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of a Colorado sky. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered, overcome. "You're perfect. I don't deserve such happiness." "None of us deserve the best things in life," Catherine replied, reaching for his hand. "They're gifts, freely given. Our job is simply to accept them with grateful hearts." Christmas that year was a quiet affair, celebrated in the master bedroom with Catherine propped up among pillows, baby James sleeping peacefully in his new cradle. The ranch hands and Alina brought gifts and food, cooing over the newest Malone before leaving the family to their privacy. As evening fell and the first stars appeared in the clear winter sky, Jackson sat beside his wife on the bed, their son cradled between them. "I've been thinking," he said, stroking the baby's velvet cheek, "about what you said regarding gifts freely given. What about it? I've spent most of my life believing I had to earn everything, that happiness was something you worked for, not something that found you." He met her eyes. "You changed that. You and now James." Catherine leaned against his shoulder. "Perhaps that's the greatest gift of all, learning to accept joy without questioning whether we deserve it." "I have another gift for you," Jackson said, reaching into his pocket. "Though it seems inadequate compared to what you've given me." He handed her a document bearing the territorial seal. Catherine unfolded it, then gasped. "This is the deed to my father's land in Durango. And the hotel," Jackson confirmed, "put entirely in your name. I wanted you to have something that was unquestionably yours, something no one could ever take from you." Tears filled Catherine's eyes. "But everything we have is already shared." "Legally, yes, but this makes it official for the world to see. Catherine Vance Malone is a landowner, a businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with, not because she married well, but because she is extraordinary in her own right." Catherine touched the document reverently, understanding the profound gift it represented, not just property, but acknowledgement of her worth independent of any man, even the one she loved. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as I am, for believing I could be more than my circumstances." "I saw you that first day in the sheriff's office," Jackson said. "A woman with more courage than options, facing impossible choices with dignity. How could I not fall in love with that spirit?" Baby James stirred between them, his tiny fist waving in the air. Catherine caught it gently, marveling at the perfect fingers. "What do you think he'll become?" she wondered aloud. "Whatever he chooses," Jackson replied. "That's the future we're building, one where choices exist, where paths aren't determined by others' debts or demands." "A future of freedom," Catherine said softly. "The very thing you gave me that day in Durango." "Freedom to choose," Jackson corrected, kissing her gently. "And you chose me, which makes me the most fortunate man in all the territories." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the small family remained huddled together, warm and secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a desperate transaction had transformed into the rarest and most precious of bonds, a love freely given, joyfully received, and powerful enough to redeem even the darkest beginnings. Years passed, and the Malone family flourished alongside their enterprises. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's determined nature and his mother's quick mind. He was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, when he was 3, and later by twin brothers, Matthew and Mark, completing their family. The ranch expanded to 3,000 acres, becoming one of the most prosperous in southwestern Colorado. The Malone House Hotel earned a reputation that spread beyond the territory, attracting travelers from as far as San Francisco and Chicago. Catherine divided her time between family and business, proving herself as adept at financial management as she was at motherhood. She established a small school on the ranch for the children of employees, eventually hiring a full-time teacher who lived in quarters above the new ranch office. "You've built an empire," Jackson remarked on their 10th anniversary as they stood on the porch of their home, now expanded to accommodate their growing family. "We've built it together," Catherine corrected, leaning into his embrace. "Each of us contributing what the other lacked." "Like what?" Jackson asked, curious about her assessment. "You brought the foundation, the land, the vision for what could be." Catherine smiled up at him. "I brought the determination to make it not just successful but meaningful." "Meaningful how?" Catherine gestured toward the bunkhouse, where several of the hands were teaching James to play the guitar. "By creating not just a business but a community, a place where people belong." Jackson considered this. "Like you belonged from the first moment you arrived, though neither of us realized it then." In town, they were now among Durango's leading citizens, their opinions sought on civic matters, their support essential for community projects. Catherine had established a fund for women in difficult circumstances, providing loans that allowed them to establish businesses or education that led to independence. "Remember Mrs. Calloway?" Catherine asked as they prepared for bed that night. "She came to the hotel foundation today to apply for support for her niece. The girl's husband abandoned her with 2 small children." "And you helped, of course," Jackson said, knowing his wife's generous nature. "With conditions," Catherine replied. "She'll work at the hotel while training as a bookkeeper. Clara says she has a good head for figures." Jackson smiled at this typical blend of compassion and practicality, giving her fishing lessons rather than just a fish. "Exactly." Catherine sat at her dressing table, removing pins from her hair. At 32, she was more beautiful than ever, confidence having added a grace that hardship had once obscured. "I keep thinking about how different her life might still be without someone offering another path." Jackson came to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Like someone did for you. Like you did for me," Catherine confirmed. "Though I like to think I've repaid that debt many times over." "There was never a debt between us," Jackson said, running his hands through her freed hair. "Only gifts freely given." On their 15th anniversary, with the children old enough to be left in the care of trusted staff, Jackson and Catherine took their first extended trip away from the ranch. They traveled by train to San Francisco, marveling at the city's growth and energy. "Hard to believe we've never seen the ocean," Catherine said as they stood on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. "After all these years in the West, I still thought of mountains when I imagined great natural wonders." "You ever regret not seeing more of the world?" Jackson asked. At 45, he was still strong and vital, though silver threaded his dark hair now. Staying in one place all this time, Catherine considered the question seriously. "I've never felt in one place with you," she finally said. "Every day has brought new challenges, new joys. Our life may be rooted in Colorado soil, but it's never been stagnant. And you've never wondered what might have happened if you'd taken that stage out of Durango that morning instead of meeting me at the sheriff's office." Catherine turned to face him fully. "What's brought this on?" Jackson shrugged, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way she rarely saw anymore. 15 years is a long time to be tied to one choice, one man. "Jackson Malone," Catherine said, taking his face between her hands. "Listen carefully, because I'll only say this once. Meeting you wasn't just the best thing that ever happened to me, it was the only thing that could have led to the life I was meant to live. Not because you rescued me, though you did. Not because you loved me, though that love has been my greatest joy. But because together, we've created something neither of us could have built alone." His arms encircled her waist, pulling her closer. "And what's that?" "A legacy of redemption," Catherine said simply. "Taking what was broken and making it whole. My father's debt became our hotel. Your loneliness became our family. My limited options became opportunities for other women. Even this rocky coastline reminds me of us, the solid meeting the ever-changing, creating something more beautiful than either alone." Jackson kissed her then, with all the passion of their early days and the deeper understanding that only years together could bring. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. 15 years, Jackson murmured against her hair, "and you still surprise me." "Good," Catherine replied with a smile. "I plan to keep surprising you for at least 15 more." When they returned to the ranch, they found their eldest son, James, taking an increasing interest in the cattle operation. At 14, he was showing signs of the man he would become: thoughtful, hardworking, with his mother's eye for detail and his father's easy way with animals. "He'll run this place someday," Jackson observed as they watched him working cattle alongside Martinez's son. "If that's what he chooses," Catherine said. "Elizabeth seems equally interested in the hotel business. She's already keeping better books than Clara's assistant." "And the twins," Catherine laughed. "Too early to tell with those two. Though Matthew does seem fascinated by the railroad whenever we go to town." Their 20th anniversary coincided with James's departure for college in Denver, the first Malone to pursue higher education. The farewell was tearful but proud, with promises of frequent letters and visits during breaks. "He'll be fine," Jackson assured Catherine as they watched the train pull away. "We've raised him to stand on his own." "I know," Catherine said, wiping her eyes. "It's just that time seems to move too quickly now. Wasn't it just yesterday that he was learning to walk? And tomorrow he'll be bringing home a wife, and we'll be grandparents before we know it," Jackson teased, though his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "The wheel keeps turning." That night, after the younger children were asleep, Jackson and Catherine sat on their porch swing, a tradition they'd maintained through all the years together. The ranch was quiet, peaceful under a canopy of brilliant stars. "I've been thinking," Jackson said, his arm around her shoulders. "About the day we met." "What about it?" "About how close we came to missing each other. If I'd left the bank 5 minutes earlier, if you'd signed Harker's contract before I arrived, if either of us had made slightly different choices." Catherine nestled closer against him. "But we didn't. You were there when I needed you most, and I was ready to accept what you offered." "Not just my help," Jackson clarified. "My heart, which I've kept safe all these years," Catherine promised, placing her hand over his chest where she could feel his steady heartbeat. "And will for all the years to come." Jackson covered her hand with his own. "When I bought your freedom that day, I never imagined I was actually finding my own." "Perhaps that's what love is," Catherine mused, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Not ownership or obligation, but the freedom to become your best self beside someone who sees all that you are and all that you could be. And chooses you anyway," Jackson added with a smile. "Every day," Catherine agreed. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens, a fitting celebration of a journey that had begun in desperation, but transformed into the rarest kind of love story. One written not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in daily choices to stand together, grow together, and build a life that honored both past sorrows and present joys. In Durango, the silver dollar was long forgotten, replaced in memory by the elegant Malone house that stood as a testament to second chances. On the ranch, the legacy of hard work and fair dealing had created prosperity that extended beyond the Malone family to everyone who worked their land. And in the hearts of a man and woman who had found each other against all odds, There lived a quiet certainty that some debts like the one that had brought them together were not burdens to be repaid, but blessings that continued to yield unexpected dividends of joy. Year after perfect year,